Everybody, it's OC. Welcome back to another episode of the Confusion Records. This is going to be the last video I put up for a while because I'm going to be getting ready for this virus that's continuing to spread around the world. This is Thursday, the 6th. And it appears that there's around 90,000 cases now. And it's probably more than that, but they're obviously not going to tell people and so on because they don't want a bunch of confusion and chaos and people not working and e-commerce crashing, blah, blah, blah. So this is going to be the season finale of the Confusion Records for this season. And I'm going to be putting the Peter Beaters on hold, and the singing videos, everything's getting put on hold for everything pretty much, because I'm going to be focusing on making sure that I'm in the right place and that my family is in the right place to be able to make it through this. It is going to get very serious. They're not going to tell anyone until the last moment. But the cases that started here, those people were sick for days as well and passing it on to other people that did not know it yet until they get sick, and then they'll be aware. But unfortunately, those people have been around people and so on. So this thing is just getting started. And I'm afraid that if, with the way the numbers look, with the R0 value of this particular virus, if they don't get a handle on this in the next 14 days, everyone on Earth will catch this disease. In any kind of metropolitan areas, any kind of populated nations, they will catch this disease. Everyone on Earth will catch this disease, this virus, sorry. And we already know that the kill rate is anywhere between 15 and 20%. So you guys can do the math on that and figure out for yourself that if everyone on Earth were to catch the virus, even, that percentage would come out to about 1.5 billion people will perish throughout this. It's not to be taken lightly, and it's not to follow the news with, because they are skewing the truth by comparing the numbers the wrong way, as you can see in my last video, well, here in my last video. And they're just not going to tell you until it's too late. Their job isn't to inform you and protect you, it's to do their job, which is bestowed upon them by higher people. And these people give them the stories to report, and they report the stories they're given. And the seriousness of this situation is not one of them. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this final episode, possibly completely final episode of the Confusion Records. I love all of you. Thank you so much. Please share this video more than any of my other videos with every person you know. We can make a difference with things, but as I've always said, we must speak up.
不要下山口条了。上不了山口条。
熊氏家族的各位亲友们、各位长辈们，我是金慧，我目前还在武汉汉口这个疫区。我向大家汇报一下，目前我们整个湖北甚至全国的疫情情况。现在已经有9万多人次， 这个病毒的传染几率是多少呢？就是一个人传染之后，如果说他没有被有效的隔离的话，或者说进行有效的治疗的话，他会传染给他身边的14个人，那么这个基数就很大了。熊氏家族的
3具尸体已经在这里躺了一个上午了。
上辆大车车床接受烟的，打开红尾箱。上辆大车车床接受烟的，打开红尾箱。上辆大车车床接受烟的，打开红尾箱。上辆大车车床。
This is more like a slow-moving tsunami, where human life, as we know it today, might not be the same kind of life we see just 30 years from now. The reason being, it is if you think about safe childbirth, if you think about surgery, if you think about immunotherapy for cancer, and many of the medical interventions that makes our lives longer and more healthy, more productive, might no longer be possible.
There's also the issue of timing. Right. I mean, this is happening on Friday is New Year's Eve for the Chinese. This next week is like the biggest traveling time of the year. So this could have happened in the middle of the year and it would have been different. But the timing of these things is often, and that's not predictable.
A preliminary investigation into a mysterious pneumonia outbreak in China has been identified as a previously unknown coronavirus.
We have a really interesting topic to talk about here today. So, Dr. Hache, I'd like to really start with you and ask you a question that is increasingly on our minds this week in particular. The world has seen a growing number of epidemics in recent years: Ebola, Zika, SARS, and now we're hearing reports of the coronavirus outbreak in China. Could you speak a bit about the likelihood of these events becoming a global threat, and how prepared are we to respond?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a very timely question, obviously, with the emergence of the novel coronavirus. I've been working on epidemic threats and epidemic response for about 20 years, both in my current role and previously in the U.S. government. I think the risk of epidemic disease, you talked about the increasing number of threats. I think that is a real phenomenon. I don't think it's that we're increasingly attentive to them. I think it's a real phenomenon. I think it is related to how societies are currently organized and the complexity of societies, the speed with which people move around the world.
New cases have now appeared in Europe and in 6 other countries, and a second U.S. case was confirmed today.
10 days ago, there are only 41 cases of novel coronavirus. Now, there are more than 1,200.
The initial outbreak in China has now spread to at least 6 other countries, including France and the U.S.
The city is on ever greater lockdown, with cars now banned. 56 million people in the region are under a travel ban.
There are now 35 cases outside China in 13 countries or territories. Today, Australia and Malaysia joined this growing list.
The rest of China is closing off.
Shanghai Disneyland, Disneytown including Walt Disney Grand Theater, and Wishing Star Park are temporarily closed now.
Disneyland Shanghai should be packed over the New Year's break. Instead, it's empty.
Today is the biggest holiday in the country, the Chinese New Year, and cities in the hot zone are on lockdown. Police are armed with long guns, making sure no one enters or leaves.
I think the most concerning thing is this massive quarantine of over 35 million people, the largest quarantine ever undertaken in human history.
I think the concern is that the diseases that we see emerge have I would almost say a Darwinian imperative to find communities where they can break out and propagate. And Ebola is a great example. Ebola was discovered more than 40 years ago and ultimately found in West Africa sort of a perfect setting in which you could have a large explosive outbreak. And now we're in the midst of the second largest outbreak of Ebola ever. So the two largest Ebola outbreaks ever have both occurred in the last 5 years, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Now we're seeing the emergence of a third coronavirus. SARS was the first coronavirus that we had significant concerns about. It broke out in 2003. MERS came along a decade later. Neither of those viruses was very easily transmissible. They were transmissible. They caused a lot of disease. But we knew that coronaviruses as a class represented a threat to humanity. And what people are concerned about now with the current coronavirus is perhaps this is the coronavirus that we've been fearing, which is one that is more easily transmissible than SARS or MERS, and with the lethality that is sufficiently high that if it became a globally disseminated disease could potentially affect a very large number of people and potentially cause tens, hundreds of thousands of deaths or even millions of deaths. And that's a really frightening prospect. Just to conclude, I think we need to acknowledge that these epidemic diseases are in fact a structural threat for the societies that we've created for ourselves.
Tom Boyke says this novel virus in China is not yet cause for alarm for Americans. There are plenty of other viruses right here to worry about.
We're in the midst of a terrible flu season.
Alarming new numbers tonight in the nationwide flu outbreak. Flu activity is now high in 34 states. It hasn't been this widespread this early in the season in more than a decade.
And more cases of a deadly virus from China are popping up all around the world.
Health leaders say that the number of people statewide being hospitalized for the flu has more than tripled compared to last year.
Today, the CDC reported there have been more than 55,000 hospitalizations this flu season. Usually, the predominant strain is influenza A, but this year it's been influenza B so far.
But we also have a much more questioning public. And I think that there's a lot of things that are converging right now that it's about complex threats. I mean, there's the whole digital revolution that has added a whole level of opportunity on the one hand, and yet threat. I mean, the Global Risk Report, the 2013 one, coined this term digital wildfires in a hyper-connected world. I've referred to that phrase a lot. And actually, I really like the parallel to wildfires, particularly right now when we look at what's happening in Australia. One of the things the physicists and engineers have said about trying to, analyze these patterns of these new fires, and what they've said is they're burning hotter, faster, and less predictably. And I couldn't think of a better metaphor than some of the diseases.
And I think Heidi made a very important point, which is worth underscoring, which is how particularly with vaccine hesitancy, but even to some extent with antimicrobial resistance or with epidemics, I mean, these are kind of represented here. These are the three great narratives, in sort of infectious disease at the moment. And then each of them underneath, and I think you've outlined it for vaccine hesitancy very well, brings together a constellation of narratives that interact in ways that are very unpredictable, and then you superimpose digital wildfires and social media, and it becomes really, really toxic. And so you're about to see, I would predict with Wuhan, you're about to see social reactions that are probably going to be disproportionate to the current threat, at least, and they're going to cause tremendous damage in much the same way that you see social reactions to these narratives swirling around vaccine hesitancy.
In DRC, our challenge is also there's conflict, insecurity. We haven't eradicated polio because of conflict and security in the northwest frontier in Pakistan and in northeast Boko Haram in Nigeria. It's no coincidence that they're harboring the remaining wild virus in the world. And by the way, polio is coming back. You know, we've had the Philippines case. It's come up now in Malaysia. We had a case in Ukraine a few years ago. We didn't have the security issues that we have now in Pakistan and Nigeria. It was actually, we weren't even worried about Pakistan. We were more focused on a small section in India and a boycott in Nigeria, and which we resolved, but we wouldn't have been able to do that in the current environment.
And this goes back to the point that I was making about these being sort of an inherent risk in the societies that we've constructed for ourselves. There is almost an actuarial risk, and you know, we saw Nipah in 1999 and SARS in 2003, H5N1 in 2005, H1N1 in 2009. These things, they're all different. You can't predict what it's going to be next time, but they're coming along at every 2 to 3, maybe 4 years at the outset, and the risk tolerance of society for infectious diseases has decreased dramatically, and part of the reason it's decreased dramatically is because the disruption that they cause, because of the interdependencies within society, the economic costs have become astronomical.
This was already ambitious, to build a 1,000-bed hospital from scratch in less than a week. But authorities have decided it will not be enough. A second, bigger hospital has been commissioned. Each hour seems to bring a new measure from the Chinese government, and that seems to offer the opposite of reassurance. If the response is like this, how big must the danger be?
We begin with that new case, the first human-to-human case of the coronavirus here in the U.S. A couple in Chicago, the woman just back from China.
Declaring an international public health emergency is rare, but with the coronavirus spreading globally, the World Health Organization says it warrants a coordinated international response.
I'm declaring a public health emergency of international concern over the global outbreak of novel coronavirus. The main reason for this declaration is not because of what is happening in China, but because of what is happening in other countries. Our greatest concern is the potential for the virus to spread to countries with weaker health systems and which are ill prepared to deal with it.
Welcome back. Scorching temperatures, high humidity and severe storms are on the way as a heat wave rolls across Australia's southeast.
Australia's summer of extreme weather shows no sign of easing, with more severe bushfire warnings today.
Sunset came at midday along the Monaro Highway. The ominous orange glow spelling a major fire emergency, as the monster blaze devouring the ACT turned its sights on New South Wales.
Last night, the dark showed just how close the flames have crept to homes in Canberra's south.
Lives and homes are under threat from 6 huge bushfires burning out of control right now around New South Wales and Canberra.
Dark as midnight, but these pictures were taken at midday. This is what bore down on the snowy Monaro region today. A vicious fire front moving quickly towards the town of Bredbo near Cooma. Behind it, 40-degree temperatures and winds in excess of 60 kilometres an hour.
Pose the most serious threat to the Australian Capital Territory, or ACT, in nearly 20 years.
By 9 a.m, it was 30 degrees. By 11, it was 40.
This fire, sparked by a defence helicopter, has burned more than 15% of the ACT, and it's now on the city's doorstep.
The fire is now 35,800 hectares in size. It does remain 2 kilometres from Tharwa and 7 kilometres from Banks.
Another nervous night ahead.
The combination of extreme heat, wind and a dry landscape will place suburbs in Canberra's south at risk in the coming days.
The unpredictable weather through the summer has made the fight more difficult. This video shows how bushfires have exploded in minutes because of sudden gusts of wind. About 90 bushfires are burning in different parts of the country. The largest are in New South Wales, where high temperatures are returning back in the 40s in the next 24 hours. The fire-threatening Canberra is also moving towards New South Wales. The state's government is investigating why this fire season is so bad. This has been Australia's most devastating summer in decades. Thousands of homes have been destroyed and more than 11 million hectares of land scorched. And with summer far from over, there are many more testing days ahead.
The ACT is now facing the worst bushfire threat since the devastating fires of 2003.
Meanwhile, Sir Elton John was forced to abandon his A Day on the Green show in Victoria's Yarra Valley last night after storms caused the stage to flood. It was about 95 minutes into the concert when the rain and hail hit.
Port Lincoln underwater, streets resembling rapids. And cars swept away, putting lives in danger. In just a matter of minutes, the town was awash, the water quickly rising.
So this is the state of affairs at the moment.
This morning as flash flooding strikes the state, with forecasters warning more torrential rain is on the way and fears of a potential tropical cyclone.
In the state's mid-north, it was dust storms creating dangers.
There was one very lucky train driver who was warned just in time as a railway actual bridge was taken out, and he actually pulled up just on the bridge, so very lucky.
Within the space of 12 hours, New South Wales experienced nearly all the elements. Hail in Western Sydney. The entire golf course in Warren became one big bunker.
The slow-moving walls stretched more than 300 kilometres. Forbes in the south, through Parkes, Dubbo and to Nyngan in the north. In Dubbo, the sight was enough to scare the wits out of a flock of birds. The main highway into Nyngan, looking more like a road trip to Mars. The driver wisely pulling over, while another pushed their luck, disappearing into a dark red void.
Sydney has seen it all today as a thunderstorm cell tore across the city. And tonight a warning, there's more on the way.
The heat and wind brought bushfire smoke, which turned into a dust storm that choked Sydney.
Residents in Sydney are waking up to dust clouds this morning. Windows and cars across the city are covered in red dirt. It's the result of a mega dust storm which has smothered towns in western New South Wales.
Today, the Caribbean was hit by one of the most powerful earthquakes on record in that region, magnitude 7.7. It was centered in the sea between Jamaica and Cuba, and it was felt 450 miles away in Miami.
7.7 magnitude quake erupting along the same fault line that's affected Puerto Rico in recent weeks.
In the middle of the Caribbean,
exit the house!
A powerful earthquake rattled the region.
Guys, there was just an earthquake.
Panicked people running from their homes and offices, creating sinkholes, sparking tsunami warnings across the region
and several aftershocks. The quake even felt in South Florida.
Big earthquake going on, look at this.
In nearby Cayman Islands, the pool water seen rattling. The last month has been an extremely active period for earthquakes in the Caribbean. Today's quake comes just 2 weeks after a series of devastating earthquakes in Puerto Rico, which sits along the same tectonic plates.
To Cuba, where rattled locals said quake was felt strongly. In Jamaica, workers evacuated office buildings in New Kingston. Same on the coast of Mexico, where amateur video shows crowds waiting on the streets for the all clear.
But there is concern about aftershocks, especially after just hours later, a 6.1 struck the area.
You see like a subtle sway of the other buildings just kind of like
After a powerful earthquake rocked Turkey, the magnitude 6.8 quake struck last night in eastern Elazig province.
After the deadly 6.7 magnitude quake struck just before 9 p.m. last night. The moment caught on camera during the evening news. The damage leaving thousands homeless.
In the immediate aftermath of the quake, panic and confusion as first responders rushed to the scene. By sunrise, the scale of the disaster was clear. Neighborhoods devastated, homes flattened by the sheer force of the quake.
Turkey frequently suffers quakes because it sits on a fault line, but this one was especially powerful. Hundreds of aftershocks were felt, some as far as Iran and Syria. Tonight, the search for survivors continues.
The other news this Friday night, the U.S. now declaring a public health emergency amid this outbreak of the coronavirus across the globe. We have now witnessed the largest spike yet in a 24-hour period since this outbreak began.
And is taking an historic step to try and contain the virus. U.S. citizens who flew from China are being quarantined. That is the first time that's happened in decades.
It comes as the World Health Organization tonight has now declared the outbreak a global health emergency after a tenfold jump in cases in just a week. And in a sign authorities are taking this very seriously, a cruise ship has been quarantined in an Italian harbor. 7,000 people on board were waiting to find out whether a sick passenger from China had the coronavirus.
Here in the U.S., what authorities have been predicting for more than a week has happened in Chicago, the nation's first person-to-person transmission of coronavirus. A man in his 60s got it from his wife. Outside China, there are now 98 confirmed cases of people sick with this respiratory disease, and 6 of those cases are here in America.
Wuhan remains on lockdown, the city a ghost town.
For China, the WHO only had praise for their efforts to contain the virus, but it is still spreading fast.
Tonight, in a rare move, the U.S. declaring coronavirus a public health emergency. President Trump barring foreign nationals who pose a transmission risk from entering the country. In effect, a temporary ban on nearly all Chinese travelers, the world's most populous country. Planes from China will only be allowed to land at 7 U.S. airports starting Sunday. Americans returning from the hot zone could be subject to 14 days of quarantine. Already in isolation, 195 Americans who chartered from the epicenter of the outbreak.
Inside China, an epidemic. More than 8,000 people are sick, more cases than the SARS outbreak that swept through that country in 2003. Hundreds of Americans are still stuck there trying to get home. Well, authorities say that the symptoms are fever, cough, and shortness of breath, and they're really paying attention to anyone who has traveled to or from the affected region. But they point out that these symptoms are very similar to the flu, which has been much more deadly. They say in the U.S. this season, more than 8,000 estimated deaths in the U.S. this flu season alone.
For two leaders fighting for their political lives, there was no better time to announce a peace plan.
Today, Israel takes a big step towards peace.
Pitching a Middle East plan, critics say is more about politics than peace.
They say it's the toughest deal ever to make.
This is a historic day. On this day, you became the first world leader to recognize Israel's sovereignty over areas in Judea and Samaria that are vital to our security and central to our heritage.
The soaring music and off-camera voiceover had all the hallmarks of a campaign video promising Israeli sovereignty in the occupied West Bank. But for Benjamin Netanyahu, a day after what he had termed a history-making event in Washington, the brakes have been at least momentarily applied.
Mr. Trump sold his plan as the best bet for compromise to the 70-plus year conflict.
My vision presents a win-win opportunity for both sides.
But the proposal crafted by President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, was considered dead on arrival since it was written without the Palestinians.
Protesting today in Gaza because the plan would give Israel more of their land. A future Palestinian state reduced to a patchwork connected by roads and tunnels. Israel would control all of Jerusalem with a future Palestinian capital on the outskirts of the city.
The plan would allow for a Palestinian state only if they meet certain tests over time. Israel could continue annexing its settlements in the West Bank, and Jerusalem would be recognized as Israel's undivided capital. Thousands of Palestinians filled the streets in Gaza City, burning pictures of Trump and Netanyahu and holding signs that read, "Palestine is not for sale."
The president had already moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem.
The consequences of this deal, with its provisions for Israeli annexation, for the literal walling off of any future Palestinian state from the heart of East Jerusalem, could be felt for years. But here, in the midst of yet another Israeli election campaign, the timeline being focused on is much shorter. The next 32 days until Israelis go to the polls again.
In Gaza, they marched on the streets to protest what many see as a one-sided offer to favor Israel rather than the Palestinians.
We say to Trump and the American administration that our people are united behind President Abbas and our Palestinian leadership. We reject this plan, a plan of shame that has nothing to offer Palestinians.
The Trump administration's Peace to Prosperity plan would allow Israeli settlements to possibly be annexed into Israel. Included in the triumphal announcement in the White House on Tuesday was the president's son-in-law and a senior advisor. He's part of the American team working on the Middle East plan for the past 3 years. His advice to the Palestinian leadership?
They rejected the plan before they saw it. They thought it wasn't going to be as good as it was. So I think they look quite foolish today. Also, one of the great ironies is they keep saying they want to be a state. If you're a state, you don't call for days of rage when you don't get what you want.
The status of Jerusalem is always contentious in Israel and for the Palestinians.
It's one of the best pieces of foreign policy work that I've seen. This plan actually anchors the entire discussion in reality. It grounds things appropriately. It talks about getting people dignity for life. It talks about Israeli security. It really covers pretty much everything that you need to orient the region in a proper direction.
Tonight, the phone's lighting up on our newsroom tonight because of this sight in the skies over Southern California, and that appears to be a meteor there. It was seen by a lot of folks tonight from the San Fernando Valley all the way to San Diego. A lot of viewers sharing their video with us. Most people say it first appeared to be a large fireball and then broke up into several smaller pieces, all of them glowing in the sky until they dropped out of sight.
At 5:15 this morning, spotted over Sydney, Wollongong and beyond, a strange light slowly moving out to sea.
Definitely not a plane and way too big for a drone.
It was what the camera didn't see that made it even more intriguing.
I could see about 20 to 30 lights, or windows as they were.
Bro, what the is this?
It's not the first time it's happened.
Bro, what the that is crazy.
This was California last year. The reaction in the UK was more subdued.
Blimey.
A distinct line of lights.
That's amazing.
Slowly making its way across space.
And here comes a few more.
The mystery also spread to Canada.
They're all in a straight line and they're moving.
Video has been posted from the Netherlands.
Oh, aliens! Aliens! Ignition, liftoff.
But for the more down-to-earth, the answer is literally rocket science. Earlier today, SpaceX launched 60 satellites in one go.
Ah, that's gorgeous. That's those 60 Starlink satellites successfully separating from stage 2.
Hundreds of satellites deployed for low-cost internet to help fund a mission to Mars and helping cement the company's reputation for heavenly displays.
Finally, take a look at what stargazers in Finland are calling a brand new kind of northern lights.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this is new, but we found out about it, or the science community found out about it, through the coming together of amateur enthusiasts, a Facebook group, and science. So how significant is this?
That's really significant, because we used to tend that we find these things with like
very expensive and huge satellite missions, for instance, or very scientific instruments. And it's very interesting that the cameras now from ground, from amateur photographers and so on, are so sharp and so full of details that they can actually tell us new things. And that is very interesting. And I really want to congratulate the Finnish group by, I think the most impressive thing here is exactly the collaboration between the scientific community and the citizen scientist community, working together with this Facebook group and sharing these photos and being able to recognize that, okay, this is actually something new, which then which they can share with the scientists, which can put it into context in the atmosphere and which processes that can cause this phenomena and so on.
And so, Anders, I was just going to say, it's great that we have such powerful mobile phones now that can do this.
Yeah.
So we've given a basic explainer there to our audience, but can you elaborate on these findings?
Well, it's very interesting because normally the precipitation from space is what caused the aurora with electrons coming in, and what is happening here is that an atmospheric wave coming up and getting trapped between these layers, as you say, is causing the atmosphere to be sort of going in a wave mode. So it is different what it hits in one moment to the next, and is alternating over a little time as the wave goes on, and this creates a new pattern that we haven't seen before, because normally we get these arc-like shapes which are extend in height, but these are very narrow in height.
And tell us, when is a good time to see these new auroral dunes, and where? I've been to Norway and I did not see the aurora borealis. I missed them.
Well, to see the aurora borealis in general is you just have to have some activity in the night sky and some clear skies. But this new phenomenon is actually rather rare, it seems like, which is probably why it has taken us so long to actually see it, because they only find examples in October, so it's possible that this is only during the equinoxes that this phenomena exists. And it's also pretty faint, even though you see it very clear in the pictures. It might be difficult to see with a naked eye, or at least you have to have a keen eye to see this separated from the aurora itself. Yeah.
Do you think there's still a lot more that you don't know, that the science community doesn't know about this beautiful phenomenon, the aurora borealis?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because and this result just emphasizes that there are a lot more to discover. That we still in 2020 can make new discovery about this phenomena, which we see with our naked eye, and we still find new features and new things. And I think this emphasizes that there is a lot more. This result emphasizes that there is a lot more to discover.
Also tonight, a stunning, larger-than-life tribute to Kobe Bryant has popped up here in the Bay Area.
Yeah, check this out. Pleasanton-based New Ground Technology created this 115-foot-tall, 92-feet wide image of the NBA legend on a baseball field.
Up to 50,000 new infections per day in China. What you can expect if you catch the coronavirus, and mass quarantine centers are being set up around the world right now. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Martinson here with your coronavirus update. It's February 6th, 2020. I've titled this one, What to Expect. Well, the first thing we can expect out of everything, of course, is that these numbers that are being reported are pure junk. I've been showing this model for a while. Not mine. I found it. Still looking for the person who originated this, but this model is clearly tracking what the official numbers were. So in yellow are the days that have gone by, and yesterday we had the 5th of February numbers reported, and here let's put them on. 27,571 is exactly what the model was predicting, 27,602, 99.9% closeness around that number. 576 was the predicted or modeled number, and 564 was the actual reported number. These are junk at this point in time, and we all know that, and this is pretty clear. So moving on, I got that 50,000 new infections per day. That is not me fear-mongering. That is me reporting what Professor Neil Ferguson, who works in an infectious disease modeling center, has reported that they are working with as their most probable number right now inside of China. Of course, that could change if the number goes up and is exponential. Really good work at Peak Prosperity in the comments under yesterday's video, where we had a statistician come in and run these numbers and look at these numbers and said, hey, this is weird because the actual best fit for this little math here is a quadratic fit, where what we would be expecting is an exponential increase. Those are two different functions. And so somebody has modeled out the reported numbers, and those are quadratics. They fit perfectly, 0.9999. I mean, it's just a great fit. And we're probably experiencing an exponential explosion in the number of cases. And that's why I don't have it here in this presentation, but maybe you've seen it. There are all these videos circulating now of these massive disinfecting machines running around in various cities in China, just spewing out who knows what, not bleach, I guess, but from these giant sort of water guns or look like snow guns on a ski slope. All right, lessons from the cruise ship. Of course, we've always been wondering just how infectious is this particular disease. There was a report that, again, I don't have here, but I could pull up for later, showing that reported that somebody thought they caught the disease after standing next to an infected person for about 15 seconds. That's out of China. But here on this cruise ship, we're up to 20 infected. That's out of 102 results that have come back out of 273 people tested. But the whole ship is on quarantine, and there's another whole ship under quarantine. And it just must be a nightmare for those poor people who are stuck on that. So I've heard a lot of reports, and people have come back. I'm very excited about the HIV protease inhibitor and the nucleotide disruptor cocktails. Those look like they could be really good. Questions, of course, again, still about how many of these drugs can be produced and at what scale and what time. That's very exciting. But I've had other people talk to me about the possibility of a vaccine. We just have to be, back up here. We have to be, I think, really clear-eyed about this. So here, it's going to take a long way to go. We heard a report that somebody managed to get a potential vaccine into animal testing a couple days ago. But again, animal testing is testing for a reason. It might work, it might not. And typically they don't. So even once you take it through animal testing, you still want to isolate and find the very best combination of vaccine particles that would confer the best immunological response and make sure it's effective and efficacious, all that stuff. So here's the punchline from this. It looks like that it's going to take a little bit longer. It's going to be at least 12 to 18 months, which means in the acute situation we're in now, at least in China, will not create a benefit. So this is from Thomas Brewer, Chief Medical Officer of GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. So this sort of runs counter to that report that came out that the stocks allegedly vaulted higher yesterday on about the supposed breakthrough. Listen, stocks are vaulting higher because the central banks are pouring massive amounts of money in there so that everything will look okay. There's absolutely no possible explanation for example, Cathay Pacific is a airliner out of Hong Kong that slashed 30% of its routes and workforce, furloughed them, and their stock was up pretty good and green yesterday. So official support for the markets, but again, really as a signaling device to help spread the idea that everything's okay and under control. Running against that is just a simple search here on Google asking about quarantines, and this is just a screen grab. I didn't hunt and pack and assemble this. I just grabbed 5 articles that were in a row. So we've got compulsory quarantine of all arrivals on Hong Kong. That's happening all over the place. Vietnam is going to start quarantining people returning from China. Now, Vietnam, of course, has a border with China, probably a fairly porous border. And so this is going to be a big, big issue for Vietnam. The Pentagon has now approved 6 military bases for coronavirus quarantines. Camp Ashland might be one of those. So this is a National Guard camp near Ashland, Nebraska. Russians have started a 2-week coronavirus quarantine, on and on and on. There's many, many more stories like this. You get the point. And when we look at this, Vietnam isn't just setting up a quarantine. They're setting up field hospitals with thousands of beds to handle a potential influx of coronavirus cases. Of course, health officials don't set those up willy-nilly for no good reason. They must have a pretty legit concern that they could justify, because these are pretty expensive to set up field hospitals like that. And so that's what's happening right now. And of course, you know, we can look back in the old pictures and say, this is during the Spanish flu. This is what it used to look like. You know, they would just set up rows and rows and rows of these beds to try and manage and treat and house all of the sick people who are coming through. And as you can tell, maybe you have to squint a little, but these people are using the best PPE, personal protective equipment they know how. They've all got face masks. They're wearing gowns. Who knows if they really understood how to wash and disinfect, but this is the best they could do. Today, we can do a lot better. This is how we're doing it now. It's a little sarcasm there. So same thing again. This is in Wuhan. They've set up this facility, thousands and thousands of beds. Looks like they're expecting and ready to quarantine people. In fact, the orders have come out in China now for people who are infected or might have been infected to show up to quarantine centers. And that's how they're going to begin to try and contain this, is at least see if they can get all the people who are sick or potentially sick in a room. Now, what happens if you do get sick? What I've tried to do here today is give you a sense of sort of the progression of the illness. First things first, I'm convinced that most people who get this illness some of them just have the sniffles. Well, let's talk the total disease spread. There is a whole bell curve of possible responses here. Some people, they're just naturally immune in their own way, or they get a very, very, very minor case. In fact, they might not even notice. And then you'll get the people who are getting a little bit ill, and it comes and it goes. You'll get the people who get more sick. These are people who are really feeling like they've got a full case of the flu. But then, unfortunately, it looks like up to 25% of the people who contract this, and again, really rough numbers, could be that that's really a much too high of a figure because we aren't counting all the people who got the equivalent of sniffles in that story. But it looks like a very, very significant number of people are getting seriously ill with this. And so once you do present to the hospital or you get a full-blown case, the question is, what's that experience like? So U.S. has its first patient has now been released from the hospital. That was on February 3rd. And so what I want to do is just step through what this person's experience was. This one actually got written up in the New England Journal of Medicine. And this case report doesn't follow all the way through to the release. I believe this travels most of the way through, but we get the early patient history on this. So here's the story. On January 19th, 2020, a 35-year-old man, he presents to an urgent care clinic in Snohomish County, and he had a 4-day history of cough and a subjective fever. So I guess we can say he first felt ill on January 15th. We don't know when he contracted this particular illness, probably early, 5 to 7 days earlier than that. But we can date this to January 15th, and so that's the date that he came back to Washington State after traveling a family visit to Wuhan, China. So this is what we know about this person so far, and here was their patient history. They traveled from China. They went to work for a couple days. They had a little fever, came to urgent care because suddenly they were going, maybe I've got this coronavirus thing. And then they had all these days in the hospital. You can see the fever on this line peaked out at 39.4 Celsius. They had a cough the whole way through, a little bit of runny nose, but only at the very end. Fatigue, of course, that's the flu. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. It's interesting that we see that the virus particles can be shed in both of those exudates, if we can call it that. A little bit of abdominal discomfort, and the nausea had 2 periods. Now, if we follow this case history a little bit further, what's interesting about this, notice that hospital, urgent care, then this is hospital day 1. So was already feeling fever, came to hospital day 1. It's like day 5 of this experience for this person. Okay, that'll be important in a moment. So a chest radiograph taken on day 3, so that was illness day 7, showed no evidence of infiltrates or abnormalities, so no pneumonia. Now that's the thing that's really the chief complicating factor with this that's really doing people in and killing them is the pneumonia. However, a second chest radiograph from the night of hospital day 5 showed evidence of pneumonia in the lower lobe of the left lung. And on day 6, they started this patient on supplemental oxygen because their O2 levels were dropping as low as 90% saturation in the blood levels. And they started them here with vancomycin, a big 1,750 milligram dose to get started, a gram every 8 hours after that. So that's what happened. So actually, and they cleared up on hospital day 8. So we have to put one more line on this chart that they didn't include for some reason, which is pneumonia, which started here on day 3 of the hospital, right here, and progressed through to day 8. And what I want to convey to you, though, is that they caught this thing way back here somewhere, and they were sick for all of this time. And here's where the trouble started. It wasn't out here until what we might call day 7 of the illness. Or later. It might have been, we don't know exactly when they got sick, but let's use this as a timeline. So day 7. So if we put this on a calendar, we might say, okay, they really first contacted authorities and said, I think I'm ill around here. They were hospitalized on the 19th. The pneumonia starts about here, and they were just discharged here. So if they were in the hospital, what are we looking at? 1, 2, 2.5 weeks, something like that. It's a really long stay. And maybe, with an abundance of caution, this person was in for a couple extra days longer than they had to be. But this is just sort of a case history that's worth noting because we've got a lot of data around it. We have slightly less data around this one, but it's still interesting. And this is the California husband and wife. They were infected with the coronavirus. He caught it. He gave it to his wife. So that was a human-to-human transmission outside of China. If I have this story right, he traveled to China. But she didn't. But he came back and gave it to his wife. Now, this couple, I can't find when they might have contracted it. There's not a single article I was able to surface after searching about 10 that explained when exactly this gentleman was in China, when he came back, any of that. All we know for sure is that they had been reportedly self-isolating in their home since January 24th, both said to be 57 years old. Maybe that's relevant. Because what happened next was they had to go back into the hospital and they had to check themselves in. And that was here on February 4th. So I'll get that highlighted for you here, February 4th. So if we put them on a chart, we find out that they are self-isolating here on the 24th, and they're doing this for all this time, right? And I don't know how sick they were or where they contracted it. And it's not here till the 4th that they hospitalized. They get hospitalized with more serious complications. So assuming they were sick and self-isolating because they knew they had the illness here, that is a full 1, 2 plus 7 is 9, 10, 11. That's 12 days later. So here we went from about, almost a week from presenting with the illness to pneumonia onsetting. This is a lot more time. 11 days later, maybe 12, depending on how you count. So that just shows that this illness, when you do get it, if you're going to get it, the actual worst part of it that you have to be afraid of is 7 or more days out in front of you. And that has a lot of implications for how you might want to track it, if you're self-treating at home, if it ever comes to that, if you want to really understand how long you might have to prepare to be in the medical care system or under care. I think we're starting to get a handle on that based on these sorts of case studies. One more for you, very sad case. All of them are sad cases, but this one was around the Chinese doctor who first sounded the alarm on the Wuhan coronavirus, has reportedly died. That's coming out today on February 6th. And again, we don't know exactly when this person got contracted the disease, but we know that he was hospitalized on January 12th after contracting the virus from one of his patients. Confirmed. They didn't run the test, confirmed to have had the coronavirus on February 1st, but that's not where we date the disease from. So he's hospitalized on January 12th, dies on February 6th. So if we put this person on, we find out that here they are being hospitalized here. They spent all this time in the hospital, 3 weeks, plus a good chunk of another week before they passed away. Have no clue the progression of the disease, don't know exactly when the pneumonia might have set in, but the bottom line of putting these 3 case studies together that I want you to be aware of is that these are all showing that once you contract the disease, the worst is still in front of you. Once you present with the symptoms, the worst can still be in front of you. So for the people who do progress to pneumonia, 7 to 12 to, oh my gosh, what is this, 20 plus days later? That's sort of the disease progression. So it means that it's a big, long slog. This is why the hospitals are getting overwhelmed. Having somebody who's in a pneumonic state, and if you read, is very, very difficult to treat. Lots of interventions if you're going to do it well. I mean, they're monitoring all different sorts of blood levels and oxygen levels and trying different compounds and getting you on antibiotics, and there's Ringer's lactate and other hydration, and maybe you have to be intubated and you're on ventilation, all kinds of things. With those heavy interventions, of course, that's a very exhaustive process to carry for one patient, let alone if you have hundreds or thousands of patients. All right, the conclusion here is that, honestly, I truly believe this. Most likely, if you're a healthy person, you're just going to experience mild to moderate symptoms. But there's a pretty high complication rate on this. It seems to be, so far, hitting males harder than females, potentially people of certain races, Asians harder than non-Asians, and as well, because I might mention that all 12 people who caught this in Germany, and again, I don't know the races, I'm just projecting here, but all of them had relatively minor cases and were released without too much difficulty. But if you do get one of these serious complications, and that may be, we don't know how many, up to 20%, the NIH thought 25%, it's going to be a 2 to 3 week hospital stay under rigorous care. And that's a real concern if this thing goes epidemic across other countries. Of course, a pandemic is just an epidemic in 2 or more countries. So we really got to watch this. It looks pretty serious at this point. And if we look at this disease progression, the first few days, kind of like a bad cold or a flu, but things can then take a turn for the worse, usually about a week in, might be 2 weeks, but it's out there. And this is going to be pneumonia. And of course, you're looking for shortness of breath. You're looking for, difficulty breathing. You're looking for, lung pain, things like that. The actions of the authorities at this point, setting up those massive field hospitals all over the place and implementing quarantine procedures and all of that, I think that tells you everything you need to know. Please don't watch the stock market as a indicator as whether everything's fine or not. Please don't listen to any more journalists out there trying to tell you this is no worse than the flu. This thing is for real. It's a lot worse than the flu, and you deserve access to the real information around that. That's all I have for today. We'll talk to you again soon. See you later.